Alrighty, here we go.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Mercuranians. Thanks for being patient, y'all.
Yeah, I'm just gonna share out the stream link. Oh, and if you just give us one moment to get situated here. We're gonna get started any minute. How are you feeling today? Fresh moon in Leo here.
I'm feeling great. I really enjoyed that moon in Cancer, especially because that last aspect was from the benefics, like together just overcoming the moon in Cancer. And I was just like, I had this realization that relaxing and self-care are important and not bad. I'm not being lazy because I'm not always productive. And it really sunk in with me yesterday. And I was like, wow, great. How this makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I feel like we all couldn't do anything but just take things very slow and easy, like after a freaking almost like 3 day long void moon in Cancer. So yeah, I hope everyone was relaxing and taking it slow and treating themselves good. Um, but yeah, we're back with the next episode of Rhetorius on the Decans. Hopefully, we'll finish up talking about the rest of the Decans today and get a little further. Hopefully, I think it's chapter 15 we want to stop at.
Yes, definitely. Oh my goodness. I apologize if this is noisy. My headset keeps pulling on my earring. All right.
I'm just gonna retweet. I tweeted it on the Mercuranians.
Cool. I'll do the same.
All right. So yeah, I think just as we kind of get things started, I think we were both especially because we do want to get a little bit further this time and get to like chapter 15. We're gonna talk a little less in depth about each Deacon, and we'd love to spend all day talking about them. But there are definitely like better sources that I think you guys could go check out if you are interested. Like the Fixed Astropod, Mo and Pow did an amazing series on all the Decans. There's
Yes.
also a YouTube channel called Hellenistic Astrology right now that is doing like a one by one deep dive into each Decan, and also um, the book here, 36 Faces by, 36 Secrets by Susan T. Chang is amazing. It goes through how the Decans correspond with the minor arcana of tarot, and there is a small group, or decently sized group, I think, of people. It's being run by their handle is Orphic Astrology on Instagram and Twitter, and they're doing a read through of the Decans in this book. So definitely, I would check some of those out if you guys are interested to get more profound into all of them, because there's just so much to say, but we have to kind of move along. So I think we'll each have a few less examples, but yeah.
Awesome. Um, I have to say, Cam, it sounds something is off about your mic. Is it not plugged in all the way? Maybe try taking out and plugging it back in. Okay.
Can you hear me?
That is much, much better. It's not echoey anymore. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, that's how the mic is supposed to sound. That's
Okay.
the mic I'm used
I'm
to. There
sorry if
we
that
go.
was not sounding good before that. But
No worries. Just much, much clearer
okay,
now.
good.
Awesome.
Um,
Alrighty.
well, is there anything else you want to talk about before we get started reading chapter 10?
Um, just as usual, you can get a copy of the book from the AFA online, in person in Arizona. They have their like AFA headquarters. I got mine off of Amazon. Yeah, and for the beginning section of the book, please you can follow along with the free like version that's on Google Books that has like the first like third of the book. So yeah. Um, Other than that, I don't really have much to say. I am ready to get started.
All right, well, it is your turn, so you can start us off with the Decans of Libra.
Yes. So, in the first decan of Libra, the native will be in danger in youth, but afterwards, he will acquire property underground through some pretext or from things found. In the second decan, he will become rich in quadrupeds, but he will die early. And in the third, he will undergo maladies and groans in youth, but in old age, he will have enjoyment in a variety of ways. This is a super fun little example. I mean, maybe not fun, it's one of the more negative um, like sequences of the decans. Just a reminder for everybody, the first decan of Libra is the moon's decan, the second is Saturn's, and the third is Jupiter's. So, do you have any examples for the first decan of Libra?
I do actually. So Walt Disney has his moon and this decan in the second house. And there were a few things that kind of just struck me about that example. Um, I mean, he eventually like acquired the largest like plot of land in Central Florida to like launch Disney World. And there's also like, all these underground tunnels that like run under the whole thing to make all the magic happen, like behind the scenes, which I don't know. I just thought that was kind of interesting, but it's also like in his second house because he's a Virgo rising. And I just think it's really interesting how he was a designer and a dreamer and a writer and illustrator, and like just this moon in Libra quality of like being very I feel like it's like dissolving like artistic boundaries that allows someone to, and like, especially in his second house, like what he did to like earn money. So yeah, I thought that was kind of an interesting example. Um, but yeah, obviously.
Yeah, that's a super good one. I got Will Smith for this one. He has his son in the first decan of Libra. Um, I thought this was really fascinating because he did have a really challenging childhood, witnessed a lot of domestic violence within his home, didn't have, like, was not very wealthy or anything like that. But then later in life, he acquired property or whatever it may be through some pretext or from things found. This is so funny because the way that he first got, so he was a rapper, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, but then he ended up on the show, Fresh Prince, because he was really struggling. He and his girlfriend did not have money. And he just waited around. Where was it? He hung out outside of Paramount Studios, like just hung out there in the hopes of meeting someone famous who would be like the right person. And Quincy Jones is a producer, and he saw him and talked to him and asked him to audition on the spot. And like there he had like the role for the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Yeah.
Wow, that's
Uh-huh.
super interesting. That is a really good example.
Yeah, definitely just like things found. You run into the
Yeah,
right person at the right time.
yeah, yeah. I don't know. That was the only example I had for the Libra decans, but the Libra decans are really interesting because I think, like Virgo, they're sort of unique because all of the other 10 signs, like each share like the same pattern. Like Aries and Scorpio have the same decans, and like Taurus and Sag, but like Virgo has no pattern that anyone else does, and same with Libra. And I feel like Libra just starting off with like the moon at first is really interesting because like there's this very like childlike element to Libra that I think is very like reminiscent of like youthfulness and like memory that is like very pertinent to like Libra's first stage, but then like it jumps right to Saturn, like from that like reset, And I feel like there's this very like stark quality that Librans have, like from their childhood into like their like teen and adult years, that's like very stark. Of course, being very Saturnian anyway, you know, Libra's the exaltation of Saturn, and that middle decan kind of opposite, like the sun's decan in Aries, is a really interesting way that kind of leads through. But I think or what were you gonna say?
I was just gonna say, I totally agree, especially because like there's that little bit of overlap with the Mercury bound and the lunar decan, and like that specific like 3 to 5 degrees, I think is like super, super spot on for that archetype that you were just talking about, how there's this like playful, just exploratory, like youthful element to it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting because like I know in a like one of our earlier episodes, I think on Jupiter and Saturn, we talked about like Saturn's exaltation in Libra. Like I was kind of talking about it like the idea of entropy in the universe, that like everything is coming to like a slow, cold, frozen, like death. Like everything's disintegrating slowly. And it's interesting how that's like becomes this balance point, right? Where the scales are balanced. But then after that, you get this Jupiter in Libra, which Susan T. Chang, she calls that decan, and this decan was hard to understand, I feel like, for me at first, and it's my son's decan, so I'm always thinking about it, but she calls it the widening gyre, which I think is really interesting because it's like the Saturn in Libra is like what brings something to a stillness, but then like when you get a gyroscope that has the balance, you can spin it, and you can try to accelerate that like spin, like a figure skater, you know, someone who's like, they get that acceleration through like that perfect balance. And then as we see as we go right into Scorpio, it's like you go from that Jupiter in Libra, which is like that cruising, like easygoing, like everything's nice and smooth, and then it's like it just knocks the right off of balance when you go into the Mars in Scorpio, which yeah, I guess we can talk about now if you're ready to jump into Scorpio.
Definitely. Yeah.
Okay. So in the first decan of Scorpio, he'll be benefited by windfalls, and in air, he'll become conspicuous because of honored actions. In the second, he will withstand dangers in youth, but in the third, the native will serve as a soldier, and he will live very long, and he will bury his wife, and he will be rich in his old age. And so these decans in Scorpio go from Mars in the first one to the Sun in the second, and then Venus in the third.
Yes. This is the Scorpio. I mean, everybody knows about Scorpio, right? And all of the hype. But it is definitely interesting when we contrast that with the decans before. Like it starts with the sun and it starts with the moon in the Libra decan, and then it starts with Mars, like the moon's enemy, you know. Then we have Saturn and the sun, the moon's enemy. But then we have Jupiter and Libra that both have this kind of like happy ending. So, I mean, Jupiter and Venus, which both kind of close off those decans in a more positive way, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
Um, for this, I got Bill Gates, whose sun is in the first decan of Scorpio. He is benefited by windfalls a lot. I don't know if anybody's read the book Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, but it talks about like Bill Gates and how he's such an extreme outlier because he had such good luck. He grew up in this perfect era. He had access to computers that other people didn't have access to. He just so happened to be lucky enough to fall in the right place at the right time and make huge profits over it because he wasn't the only person who was doing that at that time. Malcolm Gladwell goes like much, much deeper into it. But yeah, and like he is an heir to an inheritance. He will be. And or wait, his dad already died. But yeah, you get what I'm saying. And
Yeah.
he's like super famous for Microsoft. Like those honored actions
Yeah.
definitely come out.
Right. I think it's just that determination with Mars and Scorpio that's like it's ruthless to an extent that like if they're not already getting the good luck they want, they'll get it anyway. So it's kind of like maybe they live with that on their shoulder, like that confidence that, you know, maybe just helps them get what they want. I know like when
Yeah.
like some authors talk about dignified malefics in like a natal chart, like they'll get what they want at the expense of other people sometimes, like even without realizing it. Like I don't know, just like the Mars in his own sign, you know, in his decan in
Well,
Scorpio.
It's actually his sun in the first decan, but his Mars is
Oh,
in Libra,
right. Well, I was
which,
just talking like the energy of
oh,
that first decade. But
okay,
I hear you.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But he has just another aside on this. He has a Venus Saturn conjunction also in Scorpio. And like he became so good at computers because he was genuinely just like obsessive and like really liked what he was doing. Like he was like addicted to learning how to code and had fun doing it, you
Isn't this
know?
Mercury too?
No, Mercury is in Libra with Mars. Yeah, and then Moon in Aries as
Oh, right.
well.
Yeah. And he has a Leo
Yeah.
Jupiter,
Yes,
second
yes.
house.
Jupiter
Right.
Pluto conjunction.
Right. He's a Jupe Pluto.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. Yes. Um,
Uh-huh.
yeah, well, my example was for the third decan, so the Venus and Scorpio. Um, so Rhetorius says that they will serve as a soldier, live long, bury his wife, and be rich in old age. Um, and Stan Lee, who was like the founder and like head honcho of Marvel Comics, served in World War II. So he was a soldier for like 3 or 4 years, I believe. And now, he's, I believe, in his, actually, let me look up his exact age now, but he's very old. Um, oh, he did, oh, what am I saying? Sorry. Yes, that's right. He passed away. Unfortunately, that was in 2017. Um, but he was 95 years old and he had dollars in his pocket the day he died. Um,
Yeah, he did.
so I thought that was just an interesting, Venus and Scorpio person. And interesting too to think about, like, I guess just that archetype of, she's in detriment there. But like Rhetorius talks about this deacon of like someone with a lot of power, they'll live old, like to an old age and be rich. But also like the soldier piece I think is interesting. Like, I don't know, I mean, he doesn't give a lot of descriptions where like he talks about military service, but like for Venus and Scorpio, like a love for fighting for what you believe, I guess is so you could read into that a bit, but it's interesting to think about.
Yeah, definitely. That is really fascinating. Did you have any others for Scorpio?
No, that was it. But we do have a comment. So
Oh,
Jova is back.
yay.
Hello. Um,
Hello.
and Jova said, so Sun in the second decan and Venus in the third. So both of them in their own decans. And I always wondered how I survived all the daredevil stuff I did when I was younger. Maybe it's that second decan Scorpio Sun, because um yeah, well that's interesting. Yeah, I mean it's classic scorpionic nature to kind of penetrate the dead. Oh, and he just said, added to that, for me, I always fought for the underdog and protest social injustices. Might be my Venus
Mm.
third. That's really interesting then, because that could definitely speak to like the soldiering cause of fighting for what you believe in.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And also, like, this idea of exiled planets not just like it's not just like a something without resources. Like when a planet is in its own decan, like it's like there's this unique purpose for it there. There's some kind of happenstance that leads them to being able to apply that natural skill, and like being in a situation that needs advocating for social justice is very much like an exiled planet situation, you know? The fact that
Right.
there are people who deserve that fighting for, but then finding a community who will listen to you and like who you can help stand up for is definitely that's very much paralleled with a planet in its own decan.
Right.
Yeah.
Um, and also, let me just add, because this is actually more precise to what we're talking about with this decan, but like Stan Lee, they found out like he wound up in the US Army's training film division. So like he wound up there to help like design, and because they found out that he could draw and like write, and so it was sort of more about like the skill that he had to show up there and be there in that like Deccan kind of way. Um,
Wow. Yeah, that's really interesting, especially because, like, I don't know, a lot of this is kind of digressing, but a lot of military propaganda, especially today, is very reminiscent of Marvel movies, like similar filming style, effects, stuff like that. That parallel is still existing.
Definitely.
Did you want to move on? Did you want me to move on to Sagittarius?
Go ahead.
Cool. All right. So in the first decan of Sagittarius, the native will not take a wife, and he will be grieved over children. In the second, he will lead a life without grief, but he will come to his end among foreigners. But in the third, it makes rich and honored persons, and he will get an inheritance from his wife. So the first decan of Sagittarius is Mercury's, the second is the moon's, and the third is Saturn's.
Yeah. Well, just my morning pull for tarot this morning was the moon and Sag decan. So I was
Mm.
kind of curious about how that was going to show up in our convo because it's my card of the day. So I don't know. Did you have any examples you want to share?
I actually didn't get examples for this one. Did you find
Okay.
any Sag?
I did for the third decan. So this is the Saturn and Sagittarius decan, and Kevin Bacon has a Saturn in this decan. And so Rhetorius talks about, yeah, rich and honored and getting an inheritance from the wife. And Kevin Bacon, was a really famous actor, Hollywood star. And his wife, Kira Sedgwick, came into a lot of money because she got an inheritance of $16 million from her father. And it's interesting because when you actually look up Kevin Bacon's net worth, it's always listed as like 45 million or something. And there's always the footnote that this is the combined total with Kira Sedgwick's net worth. So it's like whenever, like, if you just research that, like kind of in many different sources, it's giving her value of millions of dollars in addition to his. So I just thought that was really interesting.
That is an awesome example. That is so fascinating, especially with that little like footnote. Like most of this is hers,
Yeah,
Like
yeah, it's interesting for sure.
love that. Um, yeah, that was a good one. Did you have another such example or were you ready to move on to Cap?
Well, I guess the only other thing I was interested in was like that Susan T. Chang calls this deck in like the weight of the world.
The
Um,
what of the world?
the weight of the world.
Mm.
And it's the Lord of Oppression and Tarot, and just like this combined weight that I feel like, in Sag, it's always like striving to accomplish, all of its goals, and it's always aiming so high that like at the end, it finally does like achieve a level of success and accomplishment, but like that really comes at the expense of years of toil and hard work and the difficulty of actually sitting at the top of the world. Tests you in a lot of other challenging ways that I think shows up for people that have this kind of the Saturn and Sag placement for sure.
That's a really good point because with both Mercury and the moon, like this is a mutable fire sign. Like this is a super, super active, changeable sign. And Mercury and the moon are both of those things as well. And very fast paced. And Saturn, however, like adds this weight and this like stability and like can solidify some of that hyperactive tendency that Sag might have and give it like a follow through capability. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not to say that like the moon and Mercury can't follow through, but the Saturnian energy,
Yeah, it
sometimes you
helps
need some
definitely.
weight.
Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
also interesting, like, because, like I mentioned, the decans in Sag are shared with Taurus, which also
Mm.
go the Mercury, Moon, Saturn. Um, it's just interesting to ponder because it's like that's pretty much the only connection between those two signs. Like, there's no other sympathy, like not even like an Antisha kind of reflection thing. It's just these decans that they have in common, um, which is, yeah, kind of interesting because they are ruled by both benefics, but they both get this experience of having that transition and that reset from like a moon to Saturn happen in the sign, which I think is like a really abrupt thing that characterizes like that Saturn decan after the moon, like wherever that falls. But yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
All right. Well, on to
Capricorn.
in the first decan of Capricorn, he makes those engaged in public business, and they will be grieved over children, and they will experience dangers of youth, and they will be fortunate in old age. In the second, it makes useful persons and those who are benefited by the deeds of others. But in the third, a sharp individual is born, eloquent, losing the paternal wealth in youth. He will be distressed, but in old age, he'll enjoy himself. So, yeah, this is Cap. The first decan is ruled by Jupiter, and then we get to Mars, and then the Sun, the third. So,
Yeah.
hello?
I'm sorry, your mic is cutting out again. Maybe if you angle it like more towards you, it'll help.
It's like my mouth is on. I don't know what to do.
I don't know. Is there somebody in the audience? Like maybe it's just my end that's being weird, but like by the end of that, I could hardly hear what you were saying.
Do I just
Is
need to be louder? Is that clear or no?
it, the loudness helps, but there's still this like weird feedback almost that's happening that I've never heard before. Not like feedback, it's like a glitchy
I'm gonna unplug my mic. And
that is much better than with the microphone.
well, that's really shouldn't be happening because this was expensive.
Yeah.
The trouble of live YouTube.
I know. I can feel Mercury getting closer to the sun.
Okay. How does this sound? Then we're gonna drop that and put that.
Yeah.
And yeah, Jobu said volume kind of drops, and Hootie Hoot said, "What kind of mic is it?" That's a good question. It honestly wasn't that expensive, but I will have to figure that out or get a new one or something.
Okay.
You can hear me now just with my computer's mic much better, they're saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, sorry about the mic situation, guys. Mercury is combust in early degrees of Pisces. So this was
Yeah.
inevitable, but all right. Yeah. So the Capricorn decans, what are we thinking?
So, in the first decan of Capricorn, it makes us engaged in public business, grieved over children, experience dangers in youth. So, I have Denzel Washington for this example. Denzel Washington has his son in the first decan of Capricorn. And when he was younger, he kind of went through a little bit of like a deviant phase and like got involved with like the wrong group of people and was like a bunch of his friends got arrested. Like one of his friends ended up getting shot. And his friend survived, but he did get shot. And so his parents ended up like they were super upset about that. And then when he was 15 or 16, I don't remember which one, they sent him away to like a prep school. And yeah, he was just kept on like a super like tight leash at that school. But then as he got older, like his life has become much better than it was when he was younger. And he's been able to like take care of his parents and stuff like that financially and do a lot of really great stuff. Yeah. And then grieved over children. I I tried to look it up. I don't think that he has had a child pass or anything like that, but he has 4 kids with like a very large age range between them.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's not a normal situation with the children, at least. So that's
Yeah. I don't know why I didn't write it down, but it was around 20 years between like the youngest and the oldest. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be some kind of grief because your newborn is learning how to walk, and then your eldest is getting a degree and getting married. Like,
yeah, definitely.
which actually, that's funny. I said that a lot to juggle because the Two of Pentacles card, which is the tarot card that like corresponds with that, the Jupiter and Capricorn is like this guy who's like holding these two discs of like totally different, options, I think is maybe just interesting symbolism that corresponds with that. Like, because Jupiter is exalted in Cancer, right? So it's fallen in Capricorn. So it's like this like struggle to like be getting things in line, or like really like working hard to like make a foundation for something, or yeah, I mean, I think Susan T. Chang calls this the difference engine, um,
Mm.
which is kind of interesting to think about, like how you have the Lord of Change, which is the tarot card, um, kind of experiencing like these opposites, these oppositional qualities, and like trying to balance them.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I also think just about like these Capricorn decans in general, I think it's
Mhm.
so fascinating.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
Are you okay? Did a bird just hit the window?
What just, hold on. I have to look at the,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I wish I didn't just say that on the recording, but give me a break. Because all of the snow that's on my roof just slid off and fell on the back porch. And I don't know if you could hear that in the recording, but like that just like knocked over one of the chairs on my deck. Like it just imploded on top of like the little table we have.
Oh
Oh my God.
no. I hope the glass is okay.
It's like it was so like when I looked at my back slider, like it was just a sheet of like thick ice heavy snow just falling down. Wow.
Have you
Okay.
guys
Well,
had like a lot of like storms lately?
we've been like ever since Pisces season started, we've had consistent snow on the ground. Um like it was usually like kind of getting like a couple inches here and there, but like for the last 2 weeks or so, we've been getting lots of like little dustings or like bigger drops, and we're just supposed to get like 10 inches tonight. So it's been snowing a lot.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Jeez, yeah.
I think
That's
that Mercury,
crazy.
yeah, the Mercury Saturn was just making things very cold. Like even with Venus and Jupiter in Aries, like it was not heating things up.
That's crazy. So I this is an aside. Sorry for the tangent, everybody, but with that Mercury Saturn conjunction, I should have talked about this at the beginning.
Mm.
We've been getting snow here, and I live in the desert.
That's
Like, yeah, it's really bizarre what's going on with our weather right now. And like, so this Mercury Saturn conjunction, it was snowing like really bad a couple days ago, but then it melted, and then like a thick wave of clouds rolled in, and so the melty snow became icy in the later part of the day. And there's this one part on our freeway that's like a tighter curve than you usually take going like 70 miles per hour, you know? It's a curve on the highway and it's a little bit lower. So a bunch of like ice went there, and there were like accident after accident after accident, like multiple different car crashes. That whole part of the highway was closed. Like it was so crazy. I could not believe that. And like just having so much snow here is really, really bizarre.
that's just really crazy at all.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's interesting that this happened as we're like, okay, we were talking about the Jupiter and Capricorn, like the failing to balance things like kind of slipping out of grasp, and then like literally my roof not holding the like maybe a few hundred pounds of snow and ice that were just sitting up there that's now on my back porch.
That's
So
crazy.
that's just kind of funny. But also, wait, where?
What's the chart of the moment? Yeah.
Well, that okay, the Lot of Fortune. Wow, the Lot of Fortune is literally going from the last decan of Sagittarius into the first decan of Capricorn. Um, as
Interesting.
That's very interesting.
Wow.
But yeah, it's just like the Lot of Fortune, if you guys know, like it's changing all the time. It's hopping all over the place. So it's very fortunate, just random happenstance. But okay, anyway. Wow, what a
Um,
event we had there. Um,
so back to what I was saying about the Capricorn decans.
mhm.
I think it's really interesting that Mars's decan is the middle decan of Capricorn, whereas the Sun's is the third. You would kind of expect with Mars's exaltation degree being in the last decan of Capricorn that maybe that would be his decan, but no, in fact, that is not the case here. Um, I think that's just really fascinating.
Mhm.
Um,
It does do some symmetry with the other decans that I think is nice because then in Aries and Taurus and Libra and Cap, the exaltation lord is the ruler of the middle decan for all of them.
mm,
Moon in Taurus, the Sun in Aries, Saturn in Libra, and then Mars. So like I
yeah,
totally see
and
that.
yeah, I definitely see why that would be why that's like a good statement. And like because exaltation is not the same as domicile. It's not as consistent, you know? I mean, like Mars in Capricorn is definitely about like stability and endurance, you know? But you
Mhm.
still have like a peak and then a come down. What?
just it's you. I'm just thinking you're Mars. I'm just
I know. I'm definitely like very Marshall. Teehee. I have Mars in Capricorn, but it's the third decan. Um,
okay.
well, liter
But it's the third decan. Like that's a bad thing.
it's not a bad thing. I'm just saying I'm not talking about myself.
I know.
Um, although I can if you want.
Um,
Anyways, the point being, especially with your comment on that symmetry across the cardinal exaltation degrees, is that there's this centrality and like with cardinality, it's a hinge, right? You're turning a corner.
mhm,
And with the cardinal signs and their exaltation lords, they occupy that middle corner decade where like it's really the center of the sign.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, Susan calls this decan time and materials, and I think that makes sense because it's like after you're like after like that entrepreneurial like instinct kicks out to like I want to start a business, the Jupiter and Capricorn like struggling to balance all your stuff, the Mars is like, all right, like it's gonna take a while. I'm gonna have to get there and just focus real hard to do it, but like let's get down into the dirt and like put the time and energy to just make it happen. And then like with the sun, it's like you kind of get that um I guess balance towards it's like a finality that feels like an accomplishment in the way, you know how the sun can always generally signify like honor and rank and success, like the sun in Capricorn. And even for his description in the third decan, like he'll say he'll lose the paternal wealth, but they're a sharp individual and he'll enjoy himself in old age, which I think makes sense because it is the third, right? So it comes at the end, but also like it's the sun in the third, so it's like there's that regality that you get after the hard work. And it makes sense too because its relationship to Gemini, which shares the same decans, like thinking about that third decan of Gemini, which is like going up to the summer solstice with like the full power of sunlight. There's almost like a contrast to that at this dark end of Capricorn as you're like getting into the depths of Saturn signs in winter. It's like
Right.
success
Yeah.
and endurance kind of thing.
And like we start to get a little bit more daylight here, you know, like following that winter solstice.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, solstice.
Mhm.
And but then the sun like moves into its exile.
Mhm.
And like it's
Mhm.
almost like this like last chance, you
Yeah,
know,
I
to
love that.
like yeah, have a little bit of something, some
Mhm.
support somewhere. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, well,
Mm,
I think all these like little patterns and relationships are really important because like when you do like a horary chart, like describing those changes and dignities that planets make say so much about describing the scenarios that are happening. So yeah, but I love that example because it's like maybe the sun's holding on to like its last ribbon of like its last success, but it's like just about to head into some tough times, and like seeing that translate can be, yeah, useful, I guess, to just think about the perspective there. So
definitely. Yeah. All
right,
right.
on to
It's my
Aqua.
turn. I forgot I'm doing the diurnal signs.
I know, yeah, like switching it up.
Yeah. In the first decan of Aquarius, he will be born good and will be well nourished and well matched in wives. In the second and third, it makes depraved persons and wickedness in youth, a destroyer of things, and one who suffers loss from fire and at sea. So that first decan is Venus's decan. And then the next two, it's Mercury's decan for the middle, and then the moon's decan for the final. And I don't know, it almost kind of like surprised me that the middle decan with like Mercury there is so like dejected, like the description is so unkind, you know. But I guess it makes a lot of sense, especially with the wickedness in youth, because the moon and Mercury both tie into young age. Saturn is a wicked planet, and so like when you are in those lunar and mercurial times of your life, you are a little sneaky bastard. So
Yeah, I definitely think
yeah.
of the tarot images too, which like that guy sneaking away with the swords. Like it's very
Mm,
conniving, that Mercury,
yeah.
moon in Aquarius. Well,
Yeah.
that's the Venus in Aquarius decan actually, but or I'm sorry, no, I'm mixing them all up. But what your point stands regardless. And some of them do still, yeah, correlate with that.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I'm sorry, I got distracted. The example that I have here is John Travolta. So John Travolta is an actor. I don't know if people our age like know him. I like remember learning about who John Travolta was. My parents were like, "What?" Um
Psychology.
yeah. Yeah, right. So he has a son in the third decan of Aquarius, and he has depraved persons, wickedness in youth, a destroyer of things, and one who suffers loss from fire and at sea. I know that there's some controversy around John Travolta just being like a general like dickhead to people he was around on movie sets and stuff like that when he was younger, but as he got older, that kind of went away. He lost some of his angst. Um, but most importantly, with this example, with his son being in the moon's decan of Aquarius, while he was on a vacation in the Bahamas, he was his son ended up dying and he drowned in a bathtub. And so he suffered a loss while at sea. They were traveling on a yacht. It's not totally clear whether the bathtub, the shower was in the yacht or not. But I mean, if you're islanding through the Bahamas, it kind of makes sense that you're not showering on like random islands, you're showering on the yacht. But yeah, that was a very unfortunate situation that he had happened to him with the loss of his child at sea while he was away from home.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really tough. But yeah, I guess one example I just found quickly, like with the first decan, like so Venus in Aquarius, and yeah, Rhetorius writes, will be born good, be well nourished and well matched in wives. And yeah, Timothy Chalamet has his Venus in this decan, and like, you know, like born off like well, like becomes a famous actor very young, like well admired by women and men, like just an interesting example of someone who
Yeah, born like into tons of money too. Didn't he go to Juilliard?
I'm not sure, but that wouldn't surprise me if he
I
did.
think I'm almost positive he went to one of those like super pristine like New York schools. Yeah,
Yeah, that'll do it.
that's a great example.
Mhm. Um,
Alrighty, and then we'll leave
yeah,
Pisces to the Pisces.
all
I'm
right.
so sorry if that was loud to the audience. I just smacked the
Um,
mic.
I barely heard it.
Okay.
Okay, so time for the fishes. In the first decan of Pisces, the native will be wicked, suffering loss at sea, a liar, but dying swiftly, at least. In the second and third, it makes fortunate individuals and those who are benefited from the deeds of others and fortunate in their marriages and grieved over their children. So with this decan, series of decans, we are getting the round beginning from Saturn and then to Jupiter and then to Mars. So we have just all the three superior planets, and Pisces decans match Leo's decans. So they have the same decanic structure, which is pretty interesting.
I'm
Oh,
sorry.
yeah.
Were
No,
you
no.
finishing? Okay. I want to say that I think it's so fascinating that Pisces is all superior planets, because you tend to hear about Aquarius being a sign revolved around community and socialization. And I just like really don't agree with that. I think that that belongs with Pisces, like a
Mm.
sense of community, belonging, like thought all around. And I think that that is like super apparent with the fact that the superior planets handle these decans.
Right. And if anything with Aquarius, it's all of the inferiors because you have Venus, Mercury, and the moon, which
Mm-hmm.
match Cancer, which is
Yep.
again interesting because that's like, well, in one way, no shade, but I think Aquarians can often be pretty, I don't know, they're very individualist, but they find comfort in themselves, I guess. Like that inner planets with like in the home of Saturn, it's like it kind of puts up this big defense system to like something that's actually like a very shy little inner world. I don't know. You kind of
Yeah.
that sometimes.
I've known like literally so many Aquarians. Like I have had like Aquarius moon specifically,
Mm,
so many of them I've been around. And like I wholeheartedly agree with that. Like this is a little bit of an aside, but like Aquarian social justice stems from like disdain towards like the current position.
mm,
Whereas like I feel like Piscean social justice is what like how can I foster positivity? Is it
mm,
through the arts, through music, through religion, like
right.
security, that kind of a thing? Whereas like I feel like Aquarius is more like resource institution
Mm,
based.
yeah.
And yeah, Pisces has this great sense of just like community and sharing.
Mhm. Yeah, well, if you're curious to hear more about Pisces and the decans, I recorded the other
Oh,
day
oh
the
wait, I have
episode.
a oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's okay. I recorded the other day an episode for SP Hall's podcast on the luminaries in and out of sect, and I was in the Pisces episode, and we talked a lot about how, like, for instance, the first decan is Saturn ruled, and like Pisces kind of like initial encounter with the world is like this shock of the cold brutality of reality and like this desire to, like we kind of talked about like how everyone wants to like jump right to Pisces, but it's like it's the last sign. Like you got to get through Saturn before you get there. And like just that that difficulty in like encapsulating the like ephemeral, like Saturn and Pisces. Like the first question is like, how do you understand or like put into words like something so transcendent? And it's like you can't. Um, and then Jupiter and Pisces kind of like just that acceptance of like, well, whatever, let's just live and enjoy prosperity of being because we're here. And then Mars is like, oh well, let's die and do it again. um
Yeah, especially with the end of Pisces just being that like Mars. Like you have the Mars decan and the Mars bound, and then like that tiny little sliver of Saturn, like at the very end.
right,
But
Mars.
yeah.
Yeah, Mars is like the almutin of that section, like stronger than Jupiter.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so interesting, like
Wow.
John Cena. Well, yeah, I mean, well, with the medieval like point tabulation, technically Mars is the almutin because he's got
Mm.
trip bound in face.
Oh yeah, you're
But
right.
um yeah, like John Cena has his Mars in this decan, like
Does he
a Mars
you can't
figure,
see
right?
me? Like I that is so funny. Oh my God.
Yeah, I know that's a funny one, but like just like being okay. John Cena obviously a martial guy, right? But like of all 36, where would he want to incarnate with that Mars? And he got this Pisces Mars, right? Like super
Yeah.
interesting there. But also, you know,
And like, go
fortunate
ahead.
individuals. Just no, I was just gonna say the things that he says about them is just generally like pretty good. And he's a pretty well-known, successful man. So
That is so funny. I think that like finding out that John Cena is a Mars third decan of Pisces, like that makes so much sense, especially with like his playful attitude. Like a
yeah.
lot of what he did was pretty like acting, and like fucking
Mhm.
around, like WWE, like that's not like, yeah. But that is so funny. But he could
Right. It's kind
definitely,
of like smoke and mirrors, though. It's kind of like it's
yeah.
just a facade, like Mars in Pisces. Like,
I definitely don't think it's just a facade, like he could put those guns to use if he wanted to.
right.
But I think that like that Piscean attitude of just like not really wanting to, like, don't make me actually like beat the fuck out of you is
Yeah.
kind of
But like I
like,
can.
yeah, I
Like the wrath of
can.
God, almost like at the very end of the wheel, like I'm just gonna spit you all out of this one and throw you into the next one. Like,
Yeah, and then it picks back up with Aries, and it's like the first time you're in Minecraft survival mode and you have like no resources. You have to like build a dirt house. Yeah. Um, my example for Pisces was Justin Bieber. He
mm.
has his son, second decan of Pisces.
Oh,
Yeah, super fortunate. Those who are benefited from the deeds of others. Dude
mhm.
literally was like 13, 14, just singing on YouTube. And a
Excellent.
producer like handpicked him from LA. And like he ended up uprooting his whole life and like became famous within like 2 years. Went
Mm,
from like nobody to like a name that everybody had in their mouth at some point.
mhm.
So, yeah, I just thought that was really fascinating.
Yeah,
Fortunate in their marriages. That's a little bit of a controversy though. We don't know if he's so
right.
fortunate now,
I
but
know. And she's been in
yeah.
the news recently, Hailey Bieber. I don't know what's going on, but I don't know if, yeah. I
Long
mean, they've been
story
married for a few
short,
years.
yeah. Long story short, with like Hailey Bieber being in the news again, it so like a bunch of Selena fans like
Mhm.
synthesized like these edits of like Hailey Bieber doing, I mean, the exact same things as Selena was doing, like making the
Mm,
same comments, just like mimicking her like time and time and time again. And it like kind of, and like her being just like a super fan and like
mhm,
following Justin around for like years and like
mhm,
having the money and resources to do it, everybody's kind of like,
mm.
yeah, just talking about the fact that she was literally just a super fan who had the money to be a rich person in Justin's like social circle. Yeah.
That's interesting. I just
Uh-huh.
did pull up his chart, and he does have Saturn in the first decan as well. So he does have this first decan activated, um, pretty
Yeah.
strongly too. Um, I don't know about suffering loss at sea, but maybe the liar part. I don't know. It's just hard to, it's a lot of pressure to put on any kind of self-identity when you're in a role like that in your life, and like having Saturn combust the sun, like in his own deacon, I feel like is just hiding a lot of, yeah, who knows?
Yeah, I think that that also like does kind of, I could be mistaken here, but I know for a fact it, I don't know if it was Jamaica. I
Mm,
don't know if it was Jamaica, but I know for a fact that he got in legal trouble in a foreign country.
yeah,
Like
that's happening.
when it was like that, he was like street racing and like he was,
Mm.
yeah, and he
Well, you know
definitely,
what? I'm looking at that chart and I see this retrograde Mercury conjunct Mars in the third decan of Aquarius, which is like canonical for someone who's like stirring up a bunch of mischief, like in some place other than their homeland. Like, yeah,
trying the moon,
right. Yeah. In the 11th, like he had
applying.
his friends with him, like trying to stir something up, but that Jupiter and Scorpio saved him from getting incarcerated though, because Jupiter in the 12th, like you get out of prison, basically get out of jail free card. Kind of like,
Yeah,
and he rules the
yeah.
second house, so he had the money to get out probably. Like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Exactly. And Saturn and Pisces, yeah, being like
Mhm.
the quadrant ruler of the second.
Yeah,
Like, yeah, he did have the money to get himself out of that from his
yeah,
fame.
right,
Mm-hmm.
right. Well, anyway, reading charts is fun though. Maybe we could do that more sometime.
Yeah, that might be
It's
like a
fun.
fun little
Yeah.
thing.
Um,
A little aside, one of Cam and I's favorite exercises to do, if you have an astrologer friend, I recommend doing it, is like describe the story. Like, here's a chart of my bestie who said that we can do this. Like, describe the story. And
hmm,
it's a really great exercise that I recommend to all astrologers out there.
totally. Because it's that kind of like storytelling and skill making what makes anyone a good astrologer. It's just we're so always doing the reverse of like what is, you know, like our mind's always looking around us and like trying to understand, but like going the other way is just as important.
Mhm.
We did just get a comment from Max Gascon. It's great to have you here, Max. Um, Max said, what significator do you consider the most important to relate to their decan? Would it be the ascendant, sun, moon, lot of fortune, other? Great listening to you guys.
I'm so
Um,
glad you asked this question.
yeah.
I pay a lot of attention to the ascending decan.
Mhm.
I put like a lot of emphasis on that. Even if a planet is like 8 degrees cadent, but it's in the same decan as the ascendant, I count that as an angular planet. I in Goklan and the ancient Egyptians, I trust. So yeah.
Yeah. I'd say for me, definitely the ascendant and the decan on the midheaven as well.
Mhm.
Um, probably is the first two, and then I usually look to the sun or moon or ascendant ruler to just talk more about whatever other themes may be prominent. I will say I don't use decans a ton in like my consulting practice. Like I definitely note if there's a planet in its own decan, um, or if a planet like happens to really like aspect its decan lord, then like we'll talk about that. But usually I don't talk about the decans on their own unless for one of those like three or four places.
Yeah, I agree. The the way that I go about my consults, I also won't be like, well, you have the lunar decan of Aquarius rising, and that means this for your personality, you know? Like I'm more like, okay, so like if the lunar decan's rising in Aquarius, what's the moon doing? And how does that relate to the ascendant, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
Sometimes I do use the
so
decan to describe the native though.
yeah, it's not that you can't. I
Mhm.
personally don't really
Yeah.
often. Um, but there was one more comment I had on that. Um, I don't really count like decans for a ton of like dignity either. Like in terms of a planet in its own decan, it's like a very, very minor form of dignity. Like a planet in its own bound, I think is much preferred to a planet in its own decan. Um, but it is something that I take into account with like reception, because even if the planet is separating, but it's in the superior planet's decan, like that does indicate something more than it would be otherwise.
Mhm. Yeah. I think at the end of the day, it just comes down to sympathy, like
Yeah.
if there's a connection, like yeah, like I'll note that, I'll see that, we'll talk about that. Um, but like it's not enough on its own to just talk about the most, you can do a decan consult and just talk with someone about the decans, but like in terms of just looking at a chart and really getting to the heart of what they need to hear about their life, like there are a lot of other ways you could access that information, but like I would say the decans on the ascendant, midheaven, sun or moon could tap into some major life symbolism on their own, to a decent extent. Um, but yeah, decans. Yeah, the other thing too about just the level of dignity, it definitely is minor. Like there is kind of a reason they listed it at the end, and again, that's kind of why it's hard to just talk about decans with someone the whole way. Um, but it is interesting to note, like when, again, if you're doing like a horary or you have an inception chart or the chart of the moment, like when you're noticing those things happen, like it's going to be useful to describe somehow like some part of the equation that has just this little amount of sympathy in this area that is causing that thing to show up, it will just resonate, you know, it will make sense in the context, of course, but they're definitely important to look at.
Yeah,
I love them.
definitely. Like this,
Definitely. I'm sorry. I don't know why I said that.
that's so funny. Also, I'm sorry, I have like my blue fingers. Don't mind me and my
Wait.
ghostly
Oh,
hands.
oh.
But um Decans. So this ties in with what we were saying earlier, how like maybe the Decans are not there strictly for dignity. Like it might not be the like purely for you to evaluate planetary condition, but
Mhm.
planetary experience, you know? So it's just a little bit of nuance. It doesn't help a ton when a planet's in its own decan. It gives it something, but it's not so much, it's
Mhm.
not nearly as much as a bound, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
Honestly, I feel like there's just so much we maybe don't even understand about how the Decans work and like operate on that kind of level of human experience. Cause like, I mean, they've got all kinds of use, like magically and medically, they were using them for everything. So I feel like
Yeah.
there's still a lot we haven't uncovered. I mean, not as much in terms of the magical tradition. There's a really rich magical tradition. They have a lot of really cool Decan talismans that do lots of cool different things.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, in terms of like, yeah, I think I don't know. I definitely think this book is a huge help though for understanding some of those ways, especially like if you're someone who does take like a tarot pull every day and like what I love about this book is she'll give like different descriptions. So she'll talk about like the energy, but she'll like describe like the everyday Six of Wands, where it's like, what does it mean when you just pull Saturn and Pisces, you know, for your morning? Like just those common ways they show up, which I think is a great way to analyze it because that really unlocks like what you said, that human way that we're interacting with it. Or like I do sometimes try to think about which decan is rising, like throughout the day. If I happen to know the sign, like I'll try to guess. And it usually corresponds in interesting ways. Like, I mean, the bounds are that's really hard. You pretty much have to just be looking at your whatever device to really get that. But sometimes, especially for the slower signs, I'm like, oh my gosh, like it's Virgo. Like, did it just go to like Venus and my sister just showed up? Like, whatever, you know, it doesn't need to be like that. But yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I totally get that. That's so interesting. Definitely.
Yeah. Well, anything else you want to say about the Decans before we kind of wrap them up? I mean, we'll come back in later chapters, but yeah, that's
Um, I quote me or not on the fact that I will count a planet as angular even if it's 8 degrees after the ascendant, if it's in the same decan. I
mhm.
have definitely gotten heat for that. Like maybe not like heat, but just like what? Like I don't agree with
I
that.
I
Um,
definitely see that.
yeah.
It's,
So like I if that is something that you notice to be true or false, like let me know.
mm,
Yeah, because I think it's really interesting.
mhm. Yeah. Well, should we move on to chapter 11?
Yes, after how many hours?
Well, just two on chapter 10. That wasn't too bad.
Right. I'm just being playful. But I do think
Yeah.
it's really funny that the Decans, I don't know, took us so long. And
Yeah.
it's
I
like the
mean,
10th chapter, like there's some kind of symbolism happening there.
yeah, I mean, they're pretty cool. Like they definitely deserve that. And like honestly, we didn't even do like that's why I definitely wanted to list some of those people who are, yeah, doing awesome things
Mm-hmm.
with them because you could go for hours about these and just keep finding more. So keep
Definitely.
beckoning, but we're gonna move on. So do you want to read 11?
Um, I think oh yeah, yeah, yeah. So the bright fixed stars and the powers of the Parantellonta. I said that wrong. Parantellonta. The type of the signs and the Parantellonta is established from the combination of the stars, and they have among themselves bright stars, dim ones, and darker ones. The ancients, observing these classes, said the brightest of them were the first magnitude, the dimmer of the second magnitude, and the darker ones of the third, and so on in order, as they found them, down to the sixth magnitude. And they have shared in the mixture of the planets, as we have stated previously, and those of them that are in the zodiacal circle, of those more northernly than the zodiac and those more southerly. So let's just pause here for just a second before I move on with that second paragraph. So he's basically just saying the Parantellonta is established from the combinations of the stars. They have bright stars, dim ones, there's different magnitudes, stuff like that. And they share in the mixture of the planets. So there are stars of the nature of Mars and Jupiter and Venus and Mercury, stuff like that. And then it says that we can have stars that are above the ecliptic, more northernly than the zodiac, and those more southerly. So they are above or below the ecliptic. And then the second paragraph, observing then the brighter stars among them, they found that they were 30 bright ones of the first and second magnitude. Now, when these are found partile in the ascendant or MC, or aspecting the sun or the moon in conjunction with one of the stars, they alter the nativity according to the mixture belonging to them. For example, if it is of benefic mixture, the acts of fortune are better, but if it is of a malefic nature, they are worse. So basically, he just says partile conjunction, just a reminder, within a degree and a half. Usually it's a degree on either side, right?
Yes.
That's like the exact definition.
Yeah, within the same degree is the definition. So
within the same degree. Yeah. So does that mean that like 14 degrees and
wherever,
15 degrees? Yeah.
Orb of 60 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. If it's a benefic, it's good. If it's a malefic, it's bad. Check the fixed stars that are within a degree of your ascendant, MC, sun, or moon.
Yeah, and I did grab here just the list of 30 because Rhetorius doesn't give them, but like Ptolemy gives this list of the famous 30 stars. So he's talking about and I'll just list them in the ones that are grouped because they have the same planetary mixture. So of the 30, there's a Venus-Mercury combo, and that's going to be Spica, Vega, Fomalhaut, Deneb Adige, and Alphecca. And then you have Zeus and Aries, or Jupiter and Mars, which is Regulus, Arcturus, Altair, and Antares. And then Zeus and Kronos, which is Jupiter and Saturn. And that's Rigel, Al-Nilam, Menkalinam, Rukbat, and Algol. And then we have Ares and Kronos, which is Mars and Saturn. And yeah, we actually have Sirius and Pollux listed here. But there are several other stars which are just as powerful and just as malefic, if not more malefic. But interesting to note that Sirius is noted here, and like, yeah, the Egyptians, called her like Sopdet, like it was Isis. But when you actually see this star like in practice showing up, like it's the Scorcher, was the name for it. Like it burns, it will test to kill, essentially. It's the brightest and hottest. So yeah, we have Sirius as a Mars Saturn star. Yeah.
A little bit of an aside, I know somebody with Mars conjunct Sirius who has had kidney issues for their entire life, and like burns, like their body, like their stomach is like burning, like even when they're not going to the bathroom, like just because of flare-ups and stuff like that. So yeah, with like that scorching idea, yeah, especially with an already hot planet, right? Yeah. Also in the back of the text, there is an appendix of the fixed stars, page 191. I mean, it's an index of constellations and star names, just for audience reference, if you want to take a look.
That's nice. There's got to be like maybe 60 or 70 listed here. It's a good list. But it lists the magnitudes, which is cool. So you can see the ones that are 1 and 2, and so those are definitely bright ones that they'd consider. But then the last two here are Zeus and Hermes, which is Jupiter, Mercury, and that is Beta Librae, which is like one of the claws of the Scorpion or the northern scale. And then you have this star, like the other twin. So Pollux was a Mars Saturn.
But Castor, the other Gemini twin, is a Jupiter Mercury. And then we have Aries Hermes, which is Mars Mercury, and that's Bellatrix, Procyon, Betelgeuse, and Alpheratz. And lastly, Jupiter Venus, which is in this list given to Bungala or Taliman, which is like one of the foot of the centaur. But that's also kind of debatable because it's also been talked about as a decently malefic star. So
I think it is really fascinating that with both Pisces and Gemini, we have this like very clear kind of dichotomy between like benefic and malefic configurations. Like we have the good twin and the bad twin, the good fish, the bad fish. But with Sagittarius, that archetype is not as like in your face, like the duality comes from being both man and beast.
right.
But would think that that makes a lot of sense, that like the bestial portion of the centaur is associated with more malefic experiences from the fixed stars.
Mhm. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it for 11. Maybe just mentioning quickly the idea of Parantellonta, which we talked about more in depth in the first episode, just like co-rising images or constellations with any of the portions of the ecliptic that any decan was on. But yeah, so chapter 12, onto the terms.
Yes.
So these are the terms according to the Egyptians and Ptolemy and the bright and shadowy degrees. So again, the ancients cutting each sign into regions or places they named terms or bounds, not according to equal spaces of degrees, as we said in the case of Decans, but different numbers of degrees according to another scheme that they based on the full periods of the stars. And those periods, I mean that you'll find them in the chapters hereafter. And these same degrees of the terms are disposed according to sign. Some of them are found to belong to Jupiter, some to Venus, some to Saturn, and some to the remaining planets. So what he's basically saying here is we have an irregular subdivision. It's not equal like the decans. They're allotted to the 5 planets. They're called bounds or terms, and that their numeration comes to us from the periods of the planets. So what actually he's like talking about is if you add up, so Venus has maybe 5 bounds in a sign, 4 in another, 8 in another, 7 in another. If you add up all of the Venus bounds, they're going to total 84, which is her greater years, essentially. And same thing with all the other planets. They have like a planetary period of years that's just like somewhere from the 60s, 70s, 80s. And all their bounds in the Egyptian bound scheme add up in total to their greater periods, which all add to 360. And the sun and moon were said to not have bounds because they rule hemispheres. So the solar hemisphere is from Leo to Capricorn, and then the lunar hemisphere is Aquarius to Cancer. And those were the bounds that, like Paulus said, they don't have bounds because they have the hemispheres, because they are the king and queen of all.
So to simmer on this really quickly, do you hold planet like the sun or the moon in their own hemisphere to a different kind of regard? Is that something you take into account?
I mean, you can always look at that and just think about that as like another piece of testimony, but like it's not enough to weigh judgment on something. But it is notable.
Yeah.
Like the idea is just that they rule everything, and that's like the really symbolic way. If you did divide it up, that like this is the sun's half and that's the moon's half when you think about the domicile scheme.
Yeah.
Besides that, you could maybe say Aries to Virgo is solar and Libra to Pisces is lunar. That's another way to maybe look at it. But
interesting. So then those like little slices where they both overlap with like the domicile lunar hemisphere.
right, would be extra
Yeah.
right. So summer essentially becomes, or Leo Virgo is really solar and Aqua Pisces is really lunar.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I also do not like place a ton of emphasis on the luminary hemispheres. But the bounds, I pay a lot of attention to the bounds. Yeah, I mean maybe not like a lot, but I definitely give good attention to them. What was I gonna say? Oh, so he says that you will find, so he goes into more detail about the planetary periods later in the book, so keep your ears peeled. But I think it's fascinating because like we really don't know like why they were allotted the way they were, and like he doesn't even
Mhm.
pretend to have any idea. He's just like, this is how it is.
I almost wonder if everyone just knew and he just didn't explain it because there was a rationale that was commonly understood at the time. Because he just says they're disposed according to sign, like
Mhm.
no further explanation.
Yeah. And like he seems to be quite explanatory. Like in the next paragraph, do you want to read the next one?
Sure.
Okay.
Now, whenever one of the stars is found in the domicile of a benefic and in the terms of a benefic, having significance for the nativity, it benefits the fortune. And if it's found in the domicile of a benefic, but in the terms of a malefic, it reduces the good of that fortune. But if it chances to be in the domicile of a malefic and in the terms of a malefic, it hurts and darkens his luck. Now, the force of the terms alters the pattern of astrological influences of the stars, as was said, also in connection with the faces of the decans. So it's like another alteration to their influence, he's saying. Now, Ptolemy did not agree with the Egyptian ones in several terms. Therefore, he was also obliged to make mention of those, and combining his terms in those alone of the astrological influences. And those influences of the bright and shadowy and dark degrees have no small force. If indeed the stars are found posited in bright degrees, therefore he was also obliged to describe these later on. So, do you want me to say a few things about that, or do you want to mention your point from earlier?
My point from earlier was just that like you can see he spends like half of this paragraph say like explaining that when it's in a benefic sign and a benefic bound it's better, and when it's in a benefic sign and a malefic bound it's worse. And like
Mhm.
that's super like obvious to all of the readers, I feel, like that's
Right.
just like explicitly there. He is a very explanatory author. But when it
Mhm.
comes to the paragraph
Rationale for
above,
this. Mm.
yeah, he
No.
just like completely glazes over it. Yeah. So,
Yeah. Well, perhaps it was a mystery back then, or it was
mhm.
highly, you had to be highly initiated to know or something. But either way, we don't know. There is lots of great theories and there are lots of patterns, like when you look at them, benefics starting off, malefics always having the end term, things generally being pushed to the beginning if it has like a domicile and exaltation or triplicity. Like the bounds are sort of a combination of those three in a way to like kind of rank the signs, but I mean that's not even consistent all the way. So
Yeah.
but generally I do think larger bound, they get more degrees if they have more claim in the sign and like less if they don't. Like Mercury and Pisces is like 3 and Jupiter and Virgo is like smaller, and there's lots, Venus and Scorpio is smaller, right? There's lots of examples of that.
Right. But then like Mercury's bound and Scorpio is like bigger
Huge.
than Mars
And
is.
Aries.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Mhm.
Aries, he's bigger than Mars in both of them.
Yeah, Venus has way more bound space, like 3 times as much bound space as Jupiter does in Pisces. Mars even has more dignity in Pisces than Jupiter does. And that's interesting because those are both nocturnal planets. And Pisces is a nocturnal sign, but
Right.
Jupiter is diurnal.
Right. But in Sag, he
So,
does have that huge 12 degrees, and like Venus is 3 or 4.
yeah. That's really fascinating. One of my favorite little things about the bounds is that Mercury has the first bounds in Capricorn and Aquarius. Like
Yeah.
I love
And
that
then
so much.
next are the benefics, and then they switch. So
Yeah.
in Cap, it'll go Jupiter to Venus, but then in Aqua, it goes Venus to Jupiter. Which then again, why? Because it's wrong triplicity. Shouldn't Venus go in Cap first and then Jupiter because he's diurnal, and then in Aqua it should be Jupiter and then Venus. But see, then like that fails. But like there is still something there with the Jupiter Venus switch. Like there's just so many unknowns with the bounds.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's so fascinating though. Like it's a really cool thing to kind of like toy with in your mind, especially like if you take into account like the light and dark degrees. Like here he is introducing the fact that the fixed stars, like whether there is a star there or not, like
Mhm.
somehow this is related to the bound placement, at least with Ptolemy. Yeah, but I
Yeah.
mean, those light and dark degrees have changed.
Right. And that's the huge problem with these because like we have different lists, and there's a footnote that he writes here to saying that we don't actually even have a list, a complete table in Ptolemy or Rhetorius of these bright and dark degrees. We do from Firmicus. And Firmicus actually talks a lot about these bright degrees because he says that all the 36 decans bestow like a decanic deity power to the individual, but the power is only allotted if the planet is in the few bright degrees of that decan star within each decan. So there's only a range of 3 or 4 degrees of every 10 degrees where that full power of the decan or that deity who rules over the decan should be acting on the chart. And so there's been different lists, there's been different associations with stars with each decan, there's been different, the degrees have precessed now because everything's off. So there's so many questions with these bright degrees. How do we assign which asterisms to the 36? Was there ever a consistent way they did that? I don't think so. So there's a lot of questions with these, but
Yeah, and like he doesn't say that the Egyptian terms were built around like the fixed stars. He doesn't really clarify that
just
at
by
all.
signs, that's
Yeah, that's all. That's the only information he gives on the rationale or allotment of the decans, like
right.
for the Egypt, I mean the terms for the Egyptian terms.
It is interesting he brings up the bright and dark degrees though here instead of with the decans because they were sort of talked earlier on like by Firmicus solely about the decanic power that they attribute. But he talks about them in the bound chapter, which is kind of interesting. So maybe, I mean, this is an idea I've never had before, but maybe like the bright and dark degrees have something to do with the bound associations. Like maybe they are associated with a fixed star that's like more benefic, and so they move the Venus bound over for 4 degrees, and there's this like in Cancer, the early like Mars rules the first bound for whatever reason, and it's like maybe there was a fixed star there. It's like maybe they did use the stars to incorporate that, and we don't know, and that maybe correlated with the bright degrees because he does include them together in this chapter. So I don't know.
I mean, interestingly about what you say about Mars in that first second, I mean, I'm trying to think what is there like 24 degrees precessed
Mm,
from there, like from
like what would normally be at 24 Cancer, or I mean, what
yeah,
would be at 6 Gemini?
what would normally be at 24 Cancer? Like, I mean, yeah, like
Well, right
what?
now Procyon is at 26 Cancer.
And that's the
So
mouth
that
of
would have
the
been a 0
dog,
back then.
right? And that's like the mouth of the dog, right?
Right. And it is listed as, I should know this. The problem is there's different attributions. Yeah. Ptolemy says Procyon is a Mars and Mercury star.
Interesting. Yeah.
We'd have to do
So,
all the precession and really look at them, but there may be
yeah,
something there.
right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, crazy. Are you ready to move on to chapter 13, or did we want to
Yeah, I
simmer on
think
the bounds at all? Do we have any comments? It's been a while
um,
since we've
I
checked.
would just say bounds are awesome. Look at the bound of the ascendant, the midheaven, the luminaries, planets in their own bounds, get extra power. Bound, even if like you use a quadrant system, you can look at the bound lord of a house cusp, can tell you more about that. Like if it's normally just like Pisces, but it's like the Saturn bound or something like that could explain, sometimes where you see little things showing up. But yeah, I love the bounds. And also one other major reason that like this is such a big question is because the Egyptian bounds work with the timing techniques. Like directions through the bounds is like one of my primary techniques in every reading. They've never failed ever. And so we know they work and they use them for that reason because they work, but we don't know why they work.
Why?
And even
Yeah.
if the precession was why they made those bounds, the stars can shift and that still doesn't affect the way we allot them where they are now. So that just, there's so many reasons that it makes things so hard to understand because astrology is just so beyond.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and um like something that was super crucial to the Egyptians was, why am I not thinking of the term right now? Heliacal rising and setting stars for tracking the seasons. So like I think it would make a lot of sense that like the fixed stars do have a role in this in some way, shape, or form, you know?
Because we're talking about
But
the specific subdivision, like
right, but then like what is it about the stars that has been ingrained into the symbolism of the zodiac that's like carved out into these different terms? So, yeah.
stuff. I mean, tropical, sidereal, like tropical lunar mansion, sidereal lunar mansion. It's like whenever we look, maybe someone makes sidereal bounds and uses the tropical zodiac. It's like if that's what the rationale is, maybe there's something more there that we're not seeing.
Mhm.
We're just
But
not
they
going to know.
work.
What? But they
Said, but
work.
they work. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And we did have a few things looking back. So Jobu said about the Decans like way earlier on, like a sliver of dignity. And then said after that, I have all planets in the bounds of Jupiter, except Jupiter and Saturn. And I don't know how to process that yet, but I'm here for that journey.
That
That
is
sounds like a good journey. I
fascinating.
mean, like when
Yeah.
I think about that, like the bounds alter like the material manifestation of something, like the bound lord of the ascendant will show like physical appearance and character, but also like modify like health and vitality, like length of life. So to have all your things in Jupiter's bound is probably a good thing. So
Hmm.
I would rest assured that that's good. And then
Yeah.
George just said bounds with like the heart and the
I
like
know.
a V3
Yes.
carat.
I love the bounds. I'm trying to memorize them all right now. I've been like slowly but surely trying to like tuck them away in my memory.
I've got them up to Cap, and Aqua is where I start mixing up degrees.
Oh, we take a different approach. I
Um,
have been starting with like the beginning of every
oh,
sign,
uh,
not like sequentially through all of the signs.
there's no right way. I
No, I know. It's
don't
just like
know.
fascinating
Yeah,
to,
it's a different approach.
yeah. Uh-huh.
Um,
Alrighty.
yeah. So chapter 13,
Cool. The
and we're getting there.
rising,
We're almost done now.
yeah.
Quick.
The I'm sorry, I'm yawning. Excuse me. The rising times of the signs. Ptolemy established the rising times of the seven climes accurately, having examined them to the minute, and we will want these in all genealogical methods as he established them in his handy table. But the Egyptians and Valens established seven climes more roughly, and in practice we will want these for the simultaneous risings of the signs and the stars in each clime, as Valens says in his interpretation of astrological influences. So climb here is like latitude, right? Like the height as in like climb, but just spelled differently.
Good way to remember it.
That was how I figured that out. I asked you about that a while ago. I was like, is this climb like climb like you do up like the ladder like with latitude? I don't know. That's just how I picture it. Can you tell I have a Taurus
I bet
Mercury?
no. I bet the what's it called? Etymology is related though, because like they use the word like klimata, which is the Greek word. But yeah, climate I think is like the other associated word. So
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's all connected. But
Yeah.
yeah, these
But
rising times.
yeah. So Ptolemy gives this like table and math and all of these things for
Table
the
and math.
I
What?
know. Like,
No,
ugh.
everyone right now, you need to go memorize the Ascensional Times for your birth latitude.
Hell
You have
no.
to.
Hell no.
It's not that hard. Every sign has a pair that shares its value because of conjure intention. So you have to only memorize
Hard,
six numbers.
hard, probably not. Necessary, definitely not.
Well, unless you want to be calculating people's ascensional time maturation and planetary periods and directions in your head, then
Isn't that like a 12 step like mathematical problem, like calculating the rising times by hand. Isn't that like
Well,
really complex math?
well, no, I mean, like, okay, northeastern United States, Aries rises like 17, 18. Like, so at 17, 18 years old, all your Aries and all your Pisces stuff activates. If their ascendant's like 0 Aries, I know at like age 18, you're going to Taurus and your Venus stuff is going to take over. So, I mean, if you use spherical trig and like do direct, like primary directions, like Ptolemaic, like semi-arc, like that's different than the ascensional times.
Yeah. Yeah, true. Directing
Start,
it and using a semi-arc is like way more of a process. You're right. But I'll pass. Personally, I will use my nifty difty little computer. Um, Thanks, Astro Gold. But in case you didn't
you're
know,
disparaging the art.
I am no mathematician. I would have been like an oracle on a mountain who like slaughtered a lamb
Fed
and like
grapes and like
yeah.
held smokes and vapors and just
Uh-huh. Like I would have been that kind of diviner. I definitely would not have been an astrologer if I needed to do all this math. Um, but so the rising times of the signs, in case you didn't know, different latitudes have different times at which rates at which the signs will rise and set. This is more concerned with like the actual visual experience much more than like the archetypal consistency that we have of the zodiac like 30-degree signs. We have two whole episodes. What?
I just got myself laughing. I'm sorry. Please just keep going.
It's
Ignore me.
okay. It's okay. Okay, fine, I'll ignore you. So we have two episodes on Antisha and Contra Antisha. What is so silly?
Leave nothing, and that's why I can't hold it in. I'm sorry.
Anyways, yeah. So the rate at which different signs rise has significance in like what they mean in terms of astrology. And Antisha is one of those like very meaningful forms. So like signs that rise at the same time are Antisha, and that has significance. So like
Mhm.
Aries and Pisces in the northern hemisphere rise at the same rate because they're like the same size. But if you go and like Virgo takes forever up here. But if you go down south, Virgo is like that. And like, I mean, maybe not like that, but Virgo is much
Well,
quicker
yeah,
than
there's
it is
that.
up here. Yeah.
Mhm.
And Aries and Pisces takes much longer.
Yeah. So go watch our episode on Ascensional Times because we talk about all this stuff in detail.
Definitely.
So
Go
yeah,
watch all of our episodes.
yeah. But then I guess the only other thing I was going to say was just Valens established the 7 climes more, yeah, kind of like more articulately, more roughly. And in practice, we'll want these simultaneous risings for the interpretation of their influences. So he's just saying you have to calculate them to be able to see, basically to do math on people's time lords. Yeah. Okay, I'll open this up because George did just mention it, although we were about to move on. George said, oh, and also Jobu said, trying to memorize Decans and tarot, it's tough, but it'd be cool. You got it. It's like, once I see them, like, I feel like, also, if you don't have Susan T. Chang's book, this is amazing. That helped me so much. But once you get it, you got it. It's
This
great.
tarot deck also, I love this tarot deck. I will recommend it to every single person. On the different cards, they do have the astrological associations like drawn into the art of it.
It's a great way to do it too.
Yeah, not for like every single card, but for a majority of them that does have that, and that has been really helpful for me with memorizing it, because I can see in my mind the drawing and the Mars glyph that was like snuck into his crown or his necklace, whatever it is. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
Oh, I'll show you this deck again. It is the Light and Shadow Tarot by Michael Copperfield, Goperd, Gopeford, and Brian Williams. Yeah.
Also, the Hermetic Tarot has them too, which is like
Mm.
I think my favorite deck, and that has them written too, which is nice. But so George said, I think there's an interesting philosophical debate to have about northern versus southern hemisphere rising times, i.e., there's more Pisces Aries rising down here in Australia than up in the USA. Yes, it's super interesting. Like, you creatures don't exist up here. You're so rare. The Aries and Pisces risings, and it's like, that's just so fascinating, because they literally have different planets that have to manage their house of death or their house of money. Like, there's just more people who have literally a completely different human experience because of their ascendant. They have more people, like for Pisces risings, that have to deal with Mars ruling their second house, or for Aries risings, or I'm sorry, or a Pisces or Aries rising that gets to have Venus in Taurus ruling the second house. Like, there's way more people that have that than us. So yes, super fascinating.
Right, but then at the same time, like Virgo rises so fucking slow here. And like, what do we have in America? An extreme wealth gap. Like, there are tons of people with that Libra, like second house, I don't know. I just like, at least in America, we have that, So like, I don't know much about economics in countries in the southern hemisphere. Like, I know nothing about Australian economics, but like, yeah, it is really interesting because like, I don't know, just like the symbolism of that and like what that means
Right.
from a mundane element. And like the crooked signs don't change though, do they? Like, a crooked sign is still a crooked sign in the southern hemisphere, right?
That's a good question, because that term's usually only defined to define the signs of short ascension, which are, Capricorn through Gemini.
Yeah.
So I guess technically, even though we didn't have ancient astrologers that were below the equator, the idea would be that, yeah, technically down there, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sag are all crooked, and that Aries and Taurus and Pisces are all straight.
Right. So there's this difference in like crookedness. Also, with like the opposite seasons, I think that is so fascinating, because like our signs of fast ascension are when life is beginning to pick up pace again. It's moving quickly, especially like with that Pisces Aries. Those are the fastest too, and that's the beginning of the year. Whereas like the beginning of the year for y'all is that like Virgo Libra period of time. I don't know. I just think it's really fascinating, like in terms of climate. Yeah.
The whole hemisphere debate's tricky. It's the same thing with the freaking bounds and sidereal, tropical. Like, there's just differences we can't reconcile, because this program is just designed to be so strangely functional in ways that just go beyond how us humans like to understand things.
Yeah, I'll never get over the fact that the moon is backwards. Like, that trips me up so much. Like, I can't even imagine looking at the moon and it looking backwards. Yeah, but anyways. Yeah.
Just a few other things that came up as we finish that up. Light said, "Hey nerds, what's up?" Hey Light.
Hey nerd.
And Jobu, I use the Golden Dawn deck. It helps. It uses the glyphs. It helps a bunch. And then George says, yeah, crooked swaps too. And yep, Aries is the beginning of spring. Nope, not for us. Lol. So yeah. And then yeah, that's pretty much it on the rising times. Again, go watch our episode on Contra and Tisha, where we talk about that a lot. And yeah, chapter 14. So our last chapter of the day. The parts of the bodies ruled by the signs. So it starts off with he established, and there's a footnote that's probably referring to Porphyry. who most of these chapters are pretty much identical to. He established the distribution of the bodily parts of man, which parts each of the signs and stars rules, through our knowledge of the injuries and sicknesses that are produced among men from the lots of fortune and of the daimon and of injury, and the rulers of these same. From them are known expressly, in most cases, the sicknesses and injuries. Now, having consistently stated all the previously mentioned and having made a clear explanation of the same, I shall set forth below the manifest power of the aspects. And that's where we're going to leave off, because the aspects get super complicated because it's not normal aspects like we like to think about, that he starts talking about mundane aspects and temporal aspects and these things. But yeah, so that's the Melothesia, which he doesn't say them all out, which again makes me question if there was like an even more introductory manual, like that would have just listed that, or would have listed the rulerships and the domicile, right? Like there was these things that he's ambiguous about.
Well, yeah, I mean, like something that I feel we should keep in mind here is that this is a step-by-step manual on how to tell a person's fortune, not how to be an astrologer, not how to learn astrology, not what astrology is, you know? So that's a really good point, that there might have been like a different foundational text that says, like, listen, Aries is the head, Taurus is the throat, you know, this star is associated with this ailment. Here, he's just teaching you how to figure out like what to look to.
It's like even with like Firmicus, like the first chapters are like how to be a good astrologer, like why do we do this, what is the nature of astrology, you know, like, and we're just getting this, which is like just kind of a slickly put together pasted book of definitions and other disconnected things that aren't super consistent, which again makes sense because as we talked about at the beginning, it's coming through a very windy road of transmission from earlier authors. It's not a consistent, like this was his life's work. Like he literally pasted identical things from old books and smushed in some of his own stuff.
Yeah, this is actually one of the reasons why Laszlo argues that this was actually Zeno's astrologer, because Rhetorius was not writing from like a real like author's perspective, really. Like it was almost like a guide for like himself or his students, like a rough kind of manual. Yeah, Laszlo argues that that's why it was likely an emperor's astrologer and not a teacher of astrology himself.
Yep. Well, that would make a lot of sense to me. So it will be interesting just as we keep reading if we find more things, or just in the coming years as we get more clear on a lot of these older texts, what the nature of this guy is and why it's missing certain things and whatnot. But should we say really quickly just the Melothesia correspondences? Because
I was thinking the same, yeah.
all right. So I'll do the first six. Like Aries, again, sorry to the Southern Hemisphere peoples, but another rationale for this, besides starting Aries at the head of being spring, is also that he did explain in the first chapter that Cancer rising of the Thema Mundi puts Aries at the top of the cosmos. So we start with Aries at the head. Stella just left the stream. Well, I don't know where they went. Hopefully they come back. But Aries is the head, and then Taurus is the throat, and Gemini, of course, shoulders, arms, hands, fingers, double E things, lungs. And then we get to Cancer, which is like the breast and chest and stomach. And then Leo's the heart and like the back. And then we get to Virgo, which is like the intestines. And yeah, I don't know where Stella just went. So I don't know what just happened. Oh, Stella just said that their laptop died. Okay. I'm just gonna tell them no worries, I'm wrapping it up. So okay, well, that's sad. But yeah, then the rest was Libras, like the hips and the butt, and Scorpios the genitals, Sag is the thighs, Cap is the knees, Aqua's the calves, and Pisces the feet. And there's, you know, more correspondences, but that's kind of the basic ideas. It just runs down. So that's the Melothesia. That's the end of chapter 14. And we made it through like a pretty like getting to there is like pretty good segment, because after this we get into some aspect stuff, which we're going to do our best to explain like sort of simply, because it gets pretty technical, and he talks about things that certain things with aspect doctrine that are very rarely talked about. They're things that I'm really interested in, and I am excited to chat about them, but we're probably not going to read that chapter like 15 straight through, because it's a lot of math, and it just isn't like the best spot for that on this. So we'll describe what he's talking about in the aspects in the coming chapters, and I think we'll also get into the Dodecatomoria, and then we'll get into like even more with aspect theory, things like spear bearing and different kinds of dexter and sinister aspects, and then other aspect configurations like applications and separations and rulers and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, the chapters will start getting really short as we get quicker definitions. So we're about to start really moving up and picking things up, and then we get into the houses and like really seeing how he starts to delineate the topical examination of a chart. So thank you guys all for sticking around. Jared, I see Jared is here at the end. Jared said Abu Mashar and Kepler both have extensive Y astrology sections before they begin any sort of delineation. So it's interesting that Rhetorius just like, here it is. Exactly. So hopefully we'll chew on that more and just keep seeing what, again, unfolds from that. But thank you guys all so much for being here. I'm sorry I'm signing off on my own, but this was a great discussion today. I'm glad we had lots of time to get through this exciting stuff. And yeah, if you have any comments or questions, drop them now before I end the stream. But thank you guys all, and I will send Stella your good wishes. Yeah. All right, well, that looks like about it. So I'm gonna sign off. Thank you guys all so much for being here. And oh yeah, hopefully this week we had a little mishap. Stella was a bit sick, so we did move to Friday, but hopefully we'll be back on Wednesday again next week. But it perhaps might be Friday again, but we'll let you guys know. All right, thank you guys.